now, with no further ado, what I'm going to do is pass this over to our first guest speaker today, Nicole Craine, who I met last year at the Eddie Adams workshop. She was actually one of my first portfolio reviewees, and it's always hard for me to get a person that has such a great portfolio and have to give some sort of review on it. I kind of just watched it for a few minutes there before I think I even said anything. But anyways, we met. She has just gotten back from Nepal. Kathmandu, were you in?
Kathmandu, and I went to a couple of villages outside of Kathmandu. So
wow.
Yeah, the relief deliveries outside of Kathmandu were a lot more intense.
Okay, well, so with no further ado, Nicole Craine, everybody, give it up for her. Give a little background on yourself too, okay?
So I'm originally from Atlanta, and I moved to New York 4 years ago now, and I've been a photojournalist for about 5 years. I initially started out documenting social issues in the South, more specifically my family in Alabama. And yeah, since I've been in New York, I have gotten more into photojournalism, and I usually photograph pretty close to home. So I guess in a way, Nepal kind of is a home in a strange way. Last year I was there at the same time as the avalanche for about a month, and I met many people along the way. And like I said, for a month working on a documentary, you're obviously in very intimate spaces with people, and you get to know a lot of personalities along the way. So after I heard about the first earthquake this year, I felt really inclined to go back, especially because I was at a very strange time last year, and I think I just met some of the most positive, gentle, kindest people that I've probably met in all of my travels around the world. And I felt really heartbroken when I was hearing from a lot of them after the first earthquake. And I know a lot of people don't think that you should go to a disaster zone in a situation like that. But I think after my travels there, I have to kind of say a little bit of the opposite, because I think people were really inspired and excited to see people still coming to Nepal even after such a huge disaster had taken place. And I think it really gave them kind of the spirit to keep going in a way. So I went back about a week after the first earthquake, and these are just a few images, and my edit's still coming together. I just got back Friday morning, so I'm still kind of putting it together in my head and on paper myself. But so these are just a few images around Nepal when I first got there. I did make a few relief deliveries with some NGOs I had been kind of working with before I came. I kind of helped them launch a social media campaign and get them some more funding before I kind of got on the ground. So this is actually a few images from my first relief delivery that I made with them. And this image is from a village near Malanchi. And pretty much it was kind of the first time I had seen so much disaster around, because when I first arrived in Kathmandu, I was kind of riding around Tamil, and I didn't see so much disaster immediately. Like, you would kind of see a building down here or there, but you didn't quite see like entire villages completely down to rubble and people sitting on top of their houses, which is actually what this gentleman is doing. He had 2 daughters and his wife, and pretty much this is all that they had left. And unfortunately for the men, it seems like in these situations they've kind of resorted to a lot of heavy drinking, and they're kind of faced with new challenges, because I think, they're right on the verge of monsoon season, and it's kind of the time they need to be really doing last minute planting in a way and preparing for June, which is when monsoon season hits. But yeah, they're kind of facing some new and interesting issues. This is a classroom, and this is also a really big issue that I think almost every community is facing at this point. Our classrooms and schools are just totally down and not safe to go into. So education is really a big issue right now. There are some students that are out of school. I mean, and especially college students may be looking at next year before they can really start back going to school again. So this is one of the schools that we actually were working with Child Reach Nepal to get them some more funding, and they're setting up camps to keep doing schooling. This is an image from Saku, which is actually a really historical and beautiful neighborhood in Nepal. They have really old buildings, and it's really unfortunate because almost all of Saku is down to pretty much 8 feet of rubble. So these guys were kind of going through the last bit of what was left in their village, and whatever is still standing, they're demolishing at this point, because I had met up with a group of guys that were demolishing this village and what was left of it, because it's just so unstable, and they were actually in the middle of demolishing when the second earthquake hit and all the buildings came falling in around them. So it's pretty dangerous for them to leave them standing, so they have to keep demolishing whatever's left. And so here some of the kids and members of the community are kind of going through what's left, and any sort of building material, any roofing that they can sort of save from the rubble, they do. There's a huge lack of supplies right now in Nepal, and so it's kind of sad to see them going through what's left and salvage what they can. This is Durlal Dubati, which she was in a village near Malamchi. So the interesting thing about the relief that's going on there is that it's a huge mess, but basically, the class system is illegal in Nepal, though it's kind of unspokenly still in place, especially in some of these rural villages. So this is actually a relief trip. We went to deliver some material, and it turns out that we find out some of the villages that are a little bit further outside of Malamchi aren't actually receiving the aid, because when you arrive, it's kind of a gray area, because you want to do the right thing, but there are a lot of personalities and characters kind of involved in the distribution of it. So when we arrive, we find out that there are, we meet with the village representatives, which inform us that we are not going to be sending relief to the untouchables. So in Nepal, there are villages, and like I said, some of the rural villages still have the class system sort of in place. So we find out that we're not going to be delivering aid to people that are incredibly poor. And we actually went to meet this family, and there were a lot of villagers around at the time that had not actually received aid since the earthquake. So I think it had been about a week and a half. They just had not eaten, and so they were pretty excited to see us and pretty eager to show me what was left of their home. So this is, like I said, Jalal Dubati, and she was staying in a hut with her cattle. So 2 of her cattle had survived the earthquake, and since then she had been sleeping under the hut with them, kind of in rice bags. And it was really interesting taking this photo. As you can see, I'm kind of butted up against the corner with the cow, kind of stepping on cow poo. This is also another image from around just what was left of a house, and the rice paddy is kind of in the background. It's really interesting to see such, a disastrous scene in front of such a beautiful backdrop. These are some children waiting on relief delivery, and this is in actually a village, Nuakat, and in this village they marry girls at the age of 7, and so the group that I went there with, which I'll get to later, we actually kind of had to express some concerns about sex trafficking that were starting to come up, especially in villages like Nuakat where they marry so young. It's pretty common for the girls to be sexually exploited later. So these are kids waiting for relief to come in. This is actually a guy that is sifting through. So, like I said, there's never enough relief. So when you're delivering to these villages, you kind of realize towards the end that there are always some families and even people rushing in from surrounding villages that haven't had food in weeks, and there's definitely a mob mentality. And I know it was a huge issue kind of being in Nepal and discussing with people how to send out all of the relief to these areas because there is a mob mentality once you sort of arrive on the scene, and especially towards the end of distribution, you realize you have no more food left. And so this guy, after the relief, had actually started just going through the torn bags of rice and sifting out what he could of what was left of the rice so that he could eat. So it's pretty a sad scene. And again, more issues with the relief that were kind of going on. I don't know how familiar everyone is with the political situation in Nepal, but there's definitely not an even distribution of relief, and people are very angry with the government there. And there's a lot of corruption within the government there, and people really do not have a trust for police or military in Nepal. And so when you would show up, even if you did have military or police with you, there was still sort of like this mob mentality, and people were desperate to eat. So even the relief trucks coming in, like people definitely mobbed some of the supply trucks. So this is kind of a scene from that. Again, people waiting for relief distribution. And I think even probably one of the worst things to see in this situation was not even people fighting over food with relief distributors, but as much as fighting amongst themselves. There was kind of a mob amongst the people in Nepal, in this village, Nuakat, and people kind of fighting with each other over who would get what. It's kind of an interesting place to see a culture that's usually kind of calm and, happy-go-lucky, being sort of boiled down to animalistic instincts in a way. So I had another interesting opportunity. I really love working with women and kind of seeing that struggle in a unique way in the face of disaster. And I was put in contact. Initially, I wanted to do a story on a strong female figure that perhaps women face a unique situation in Nepal right now because typically speaking, they raise the children kind of they have shops and they kind of run everything alone because most of the husbands are usually migrant workers. So Saudi Arabia and Qatar, like a lot of them are even kind of indentured servants in a way. So they take these jobs abroad, and the women are sort of left to fend for the household and the children on their own. This kind of introduces a unique problem for them because now most of their homes that are down to rubble, they're kind of responsible for rebuilding them. And the kids are out of school, so the kids are home. And if they choose to, they still need to manage the shops. So I decided I wanted to follow a strong female character that could kind of express the struggle that all women were going through. But I ended up getting more than I bargained for, and I got two really amazing women. The first one is Pushpa Basnet. She was a CNN hero in 2012, and she started a children's home for children that are incarcerated with their parents. So in Nepal, they do not have the facilities to put children in foster homes after their parents are arrested. So basically, the children go to prison with their parents, and they're raised in the jail cell. And that's including if the woman's pregnant, like the kid will be raised from a baby to an adult in the jail cell as long as the parent is still incarcerated. So Pushpa Basnet started a home to take children in, and she keeps it very small. She likes to work with a small group of children, and they call her Mamu. There's actually a documentary that aired at Sundance, and it's called Waiting for Mamu. And I encourage anyone to see it if you haven't. It's really amazing. And I got to meet the director on this trip, Thomas Morgan, and he's really fascinating and inspiring. And they definitely, at this point, probably need all the help that they can get because it's pretty sad what happened with their situation. But this is Pushpa Basnet, and I got to actually spend the day of the earthquake with her, which was interesting. So these are some of the children that she works with. And I think right now she has 38, and there are 7 children right now that are sort of caught up in the process because they were visiting their parents during the earthquake. And even though she's had them for years, it's the parents are sort of like involved in mafia, and they went to a couple different orphanages, and she hasn't gotten them back yet, so she's pretty stressed out. So the day of the earthquake, we were visiting the scene. So in 2012, CNN gave her and awarded her money to build a new home, a bigger home that she could support more children. And right now she's staying in a home that she's renting out, and she has built 4 buildings. 3 out of the 4 buildings were completed, and the first earthquake, took down 3 of the 3 completed buildings, almost entirely. So actually the building that we're looking at here in the distance was completed when it fell in. So we were kind of going to scope out some of the damage that had happened on site. And this is inside one of the buildings that was completed and is now completely demolished to rubble. But this is where we're kind of standing when the earthquake happens. So we kind of had to scatter very quickly. So this is Pushpa. And it was kind of an interesting experience because you can't necessarily tell from the photo, but we are standing when the earthquake hits inside of this building on your left. So we had to run down to the side of the hill to get out. And the only way to get out of the entire scene was to run through the buildings. So we kind of stood through the earthquake next to the building, and the wall was like half demolished already. So bricks were just sort of falling, and Pushpa just sort of held on to me. And she was already extremely upset and nervous, I think, from what had happened weeks prior. And she was pretty upset about all of the work and money that had gone into building her home. She's starting from scratch without the money. And so she's facing like an entirely different struggle at this point. And basically she's seen her dreams sort of crash down around her. So it was really interesting to spend that moment with her when the second earthquake hit. But we immediately go into concern about the children, of course, which were all safe, fortunately. So we're rushing back to check on the kids. And I think one of the most interesting things about being there during the earthquake and after the earthquake, and like I said, I think I'm still sort of processing what that means as well, but especially now that I'm back in New York. And but there were series of aftershocks that sort of happened following the earthquake that I think it was almost in a way sometimes more disturbing and shocking than the earthquake itself, because you're constantly living in a fear that it's going to happen again, especially after the second earthquake, after everyone had sort of calmed down. It was the reality that it could happen again and again. And so the day of the earthquake, we rushed back to the children, and the aftershocks sort of start happening again, and there's just this high alert with the children and with Pushpa and even myself. So this is an aftershock that the kids are sort of running. And like I said, at that point, it's like everything is sort of high stress, like every moment's sort of the last in a weird way. This is Pushpa calling her family members to make sure they're okay. And unfortunately, her children that morning had just moved back into the bottom level of the house they have rented. And we had to set up camp and continue moving out. So we're back outside, and fortunately she had tents this time. Like previously the kids had just sort of been staying out without anything to sleep under. So fortunately she was able to get tents this go around. And the kids meditating. And then, of course, in the evening, it's unique because Nepal is already their electric system, they already have a lot of solar energy that they sort of power themselves off of. So the earthquake was kind of interesting being around at night because you would just have like complete darkness And then just at the bottom level of every single shop, there would just be either a candle or a little bit of light and like an entire family sort of sitting around it. And here the kids were washing dishes after dinner that night before they went back out to the tents. So I also had the opportunity to meet a really inspiring woman after Pushpa. I felt like after I spent the day with her sort of during the earthquake, we kind of had our separation after that. I was still keeping in contact with her, but I found another interesting subject as well that is also a CNN hero, and she won Mother Teresa Award last year, but Anuradha Koirala started Maiti Nepal, which is an organization for women that are sex trafficked. So she, during the earthquake, it's kind of a new set of obstacles because you have this moment where during a catastrophe, men can sort of come in and offer positions for new jobs, or women that are in shelters that now are alone and don't have any family around. It's a perfect storm for them to sort of get grabbed up and taken to India, typically, in search of work. So this is Anuradha Koirala, and she got Mother Teresa Award last year. And she also got CNN Hero. And she has a much larger home. She has 525 girls, and I believe about 65 boys. And the boys are typically homeless, but also they can be trafficked for begging or any number of situations. But the girls are a unique, and I believe the numbers are 15 to 17,000 women and children are trafficked a year. And she's an interesting character because she has, they do respect her and treat her as the mother of their family, and they do consider themselves a family. So she's an incredibly inspiring woman, and she had she's also extremely strict, and I mean, I think in a funny way, I think we all sort of feared her. And even on that trip, it was like she kind of rules with an iron fist, and she has no time for nonsense. And I can only imagine with the level of stress and the number of people she deals with daily. But as soon as I met her, we immediately had some pretty unique situations right off the bat. This is a board of the convicted criminals, and they also had a list of brothel owners, which are mostly women. And the way that it typically works is a man will come into a community and kind of befriend a local shop owner so that there's someone within the community that's highly trusted. And then that man will usually start offering up job positions and everything in the neighborhood. And because they have a mutual contact that they sort of respect and trust, the women usually will just sort of fall into the trap, unfortunately. This is the first day that I had sort of arrived to see what Anuradha was up to during the earthquake, and I saw that immediately she was kind of introduced to a new set of concerns and immediate issues at hand. And the first girl that walks in almost immediately is a girl that had just been intercepted at the airport, and a cab driver had picked her up. She had just come from Saudi Arabia, and she had been there 2 years. She was a Nepalese girl. And at the airport, Anuradha has sort of stationed her own set of girls that have been trafficked before, so they know what to look out for. And they sit at the departure gates, sort of scoping out to see if anyone looks suspicious or afraid or like they don't know where they're going. Unfortunately, this girl was intercepted on her way back. A cab driver had actually brought her to, had picked her up wearing nothing but a burqa and had driven her to get a change of clothes that she was wearing underneath. But it was kind of interesting because he had picked her up at 1 p.m. the day before and was dropping her off at 5 p.m. the next day. So it's also very common that they're sexually exploited at the time in between the time that they arrive and the time that they're actually intercepted at Maiti Nepal. So this is kind of her arriving. In a photo of her passport, so she was supposed to be in Saudi Arabia for 90 days. And it's obviously 2 years later at this point, so it was pretty clear what had been going on. And I think the first step usually is to call and get her evaluated. It was kind of interesting seeing her arrive there because a lot of the girls on the site almost do act mentally retarded, and they're sort of boiled down to like animalistic instincts almost. It was kind of interesting seeing her interact upon her first arrival. So the cab driver that had picked her up from the airport had taken her and gotten her this outfit, which was interesting because I think Anuradha really believed that he had sexually exploited her in between the time that she had arrived in Nepal and been taken to Maiti Nepal. This is a photo of her arguing with the cab driver on whether or not he had sexually exploited her. And like I said, a lot of these girls that first arrive at Maiti Nepal after being sexually exploited for any prolonged period of time sort of become retarded, and I think it takes a long time for them to sort of get back to normality. And I don't know if I'll ever sort of get over these images of this girl, but Manku was her name. She was she had just gotten back from the hospital and ran over to the flowers and sort of tearing them out and smelling them and throwing them. And it was kind of like watching someone else's dream. So the kids, like all 500 of them, it's in the evening they all gather out into the courtyard and start doing a dance that they've choreographed. And especially after the earthquake, it's something that they've used as sort of a coping mechanism, sort of using the arts to relax the situation a little bit. And it's kind of like a dream, I guess, that you have when you're in elementary school and you think you're having a dream where you show up to school without your clothes on or something. But it was like watching it in real life for someone else. So she sort of like storms through the courtyard and gets up on stage and starts dancing. And it was really a strange thing to watch because everyone is just sort of like, what's going on? And she's like in her own world. It's really strange to watch. Fortunately, towards the end of my trip at Maiti Nepal, her brother was able to be contacted and came to pick her up. It's kind of a strange situation when a girl goes back into society because there's a pretty high chance that they will be sex trafficked again, especially if it's their family or husbands that have been involved in their previous encounters. There's another interesting set of issues, especially at Maiti Nepal, that we were having, which is the girls that were at shelters that were injured. They would be taken to shelters that it was easy to sex traffic them from because it would be women and children kind of sitting in shelters for weeks. And it would be the perfect storm for a man to come in and offer up a job, or if it's a young child, they would claim to know them and take them to sex traffic them or sexually exploit them. So Anuradha basically opened up her doors and said if there are, into the hospitals, if there are any women and children that look like they may be endangered in the future, that she wants to take all of them because she wants to make sure that they're protected and they have somewhere safe. And that was definitely the case. There were quite a few women in and out of there throughout the time that I was there. I think on a daily basis we had probably 2 or 3 coming in. And this is a mother that was picked up from one of the hospitals nearby, and she didn't remember her baby's name. It was kind of shocking, but her baby had suffered eye damage from the rubble because they had woken up in rubble, and the baby was still having a hard time seeing. This is one of the children. Her name was Naimi, and she was found at a hospital as well. And I believe both of her parents had passed away at this point, and they had sort of found her. She was very young, so they took her into Maiti Nepal immediately because she was, I believe, about 6 or 7 years old and just at the age where she was sort of a victim to become sex trafficked if they didn't get her out of there. And that's her with another child, Dolma, and her parents were both deceased as well. So she had just come to Maiti Nepal around the same time. Another unique situation that was sort of going on at Maiti Nepal at the same time, women were sort of storming in that their sisters were missing, and there was this always high red alert going on at all times, and women were coming in, my sister has been gone and it's been 5 days and I haven't seen her, and women were sort of coming down from the villages that they had last seen their sister. And I think in this particular case, the woman had gotten a phone call from her 2 sisters that they were coming down to Kathmandu and they were looking for a new job, and they never showed up. And the last phone call she got, they were going to India, which pretty much, it's an open border between Nepal and India, so it's pretty easy for the women to get trafficked in between. And there are a lot of women in the shelters and in the tents that no longer have their homes, so many of them are just offering up their children. They are sort of bringing them to Maiti Nepal to hopefully have a better future or better situation than they can currently offer, and especially if the woman doesn't believe she'll be able to get a home back together at any point in the near future. They're sort of offering up their children to live at Maiti Nepal. This is Anurada taking them around to introduce them to the children. Another thing that's going on, so Maiti Nepal has established 11 checkpoints in between there are 10 between the Indian and Nepal border, and there's one at the edge of Kathmandu Valley that is sort of a main road that everybody goes through. So I got the opportunity to go to the checkpoints, and 4 women work each checkpoint, and those 4 women have been sex trafficked before, so they know what to look for when the buses are coming through. Typically, they search the tourist buses, and they sort of look for strange situations with the men and the women. It's usually a girl with a man or a couple of girls traveling together, and they station themselves at the checkpoint and sort of go through each tourist bus and look for any red flags. This is a stack of images of all the girls that are missing for that checkpoint. And I believe it was at least a few hundred. It was kind of this never-ending stack of... It was kind of a strange situation because there's not a way to fax photos immediately to the checkpoint. So it was kind of strange because the women that were coming in with missing sisters at Maiti Nepal and Kathmandu, I wasn't really seeing any of the images of them at the checkpoints. But anyway, so this is a stack of the images of all the women that were missing from the last 2 years. This is one of the tourist buses. While I was there, we also had the chance to do an interception. They, like I said, they question women on the buses if they know where they're going, and if they can't answer the question, not just what town they're going to, but what village and whose house and who are you meeting. And if you can't answer the question confidently, they sort of bring you off to ask you more questions to figure out if you really have a destination and if you know who you're meeting. And it was kind of a unique situation this day because we did do an interception, and this is actually the bus driver. These are the 2 women from Maiti Nepal in the yellow. And the girl had She was on the bus with an expired passport, an expired visa, and I believe her story, which didn't match between her story, her parents' story, and her husband's story. But she was going to Kuwait, but she did not have a passport and she did not have a visa. So the women immediately flagged her as a sex trafficking victim. And she was pretty scared. I don't think she knew exactly what was going on. And I think the interesting part about it was this is also pretty common as well. The husbands will sell their wives. In Hinduism, you get married very early on, so you can be dating someone for not even a couple of months before you're sort of married. And she had just gotten married to a guy who was sending her to Kuwait, or so she thought. But again, their stories didn't match up. So as soon as we intercept her, we get her husband on the phone and her parents on the phone, and it appeared as though her husband had just sold her. And so we had to stop and have this conversation with her about where she was going, and she didn't seem to be able to answer the question. And her husband had told her that she would be getting her paperwork in India, which is also immediately a red flag because you can't get a Nepalese passport in India. So we pulled her off. And she called her husband, who immediately said, if you want to go back to Maiti Nepal, please do. Like, I'm not coming to get you. And so she was pretty shocked, and she was ready to go back to Maiti Nepal. So Maiti Nepal, if the women are stopped and they realize that their families have tried to sell them or their husband has tried to sell them, Maiti Nepal will offer them the opportunity to come back and live in the home and continue their education there on site. And the girl had already agreed to do that, but her husband ended up showing up on the scene because immediately he told her to forget about it, just go back to Maiti Nepal. But he ended up driving with his friend to the checkpoint. So we had to pull her off of the bus. So she's getting her stuff, and we're just sort of explaining everything that's going to be happening. But her husband showed up. So I guess the saddest part about this particular instance was, after the counseling and everything that we had done with her, and unfortunately, we can't take a woman against her will. So after the husband showed up and talked to her, and it was very strange watching them interact because they almost didn't make any eye contact at all, and he seemed to find it pretty funny, and I don't know, she was pretty upset about it. It was kind of a strange thing to witness their interaction together. But unfortunately, after counseling, she ended up going back with him. So, but Maiti Nepal does give them all of the information. So if they do run into that situation again, they are able to contact Maiti Nepal and receive any sort of counseling or emergency evacuation if they need it. And I'm going to end on one of the stories of the girls from the sex trafficking organization. Her name is Radhika, and she has a book out, actually. It's called Radhika's Story. And she had a pretty interesting story, which was her husband had actually sold her in a sex trafficking twice. It was very strange listening to her entire story. We sort of interviewed her on the entire thing. But initially, her husband had given her a soda, and she passed out and woke up in a hospital with her kidneys missing. One kidney missing, and they had sold it. And then after that, her husband sold her into sex trafficking twice. So it's kind of interesting being with her and hearing her stories. She's now the gardener at Maiti Nepal, so she takes care of all the plants. And she's fascinating. She was actually extremely confident, and it was kind of a relief to get to see somebody who had sort of worked through that issue. And during her time in the brothels, she was saying one form of torture was cigarette burning on her feet. So she actually has a few scars kind of on the knuckles of her feet, but she was sort of telling me about that as well. just sort of a final image of Anuradha. I believe her opening statement when I arrived to Maiti Nepal was, I'm only tired when I don't have any work left to do. And this was sort of the final shot of her extremely tired. She was kind of an amazing character because she had been sitting outside of Maiti Nepal in the front gate from around 6 a.m. in the morning till around 2 to 4 a.m. at night. So she was kind of the first on the ground if any aftershocks happened, and sort of managed anything that was coming in and out of Maiti Nepal throughout the earthquake. So I was really grateful that I got to meet her and get to learn about that organization. It was really amazing. But yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you. That was really great. If there's any questions, if anyone has any questions before we move on, no? Yes? No? Give it up, Nicole Craine. Thank you so much.